Bandwidth for changelog is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com. We move fast and fix things here at changelog because of Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com. And we're hosted on Linode servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. This episode is brought to you by Rollbar. Move fast and fix things. Resolve errors in minutes and deploy with confidence. Head to rollbar.com/changelog. Request a demo. Get started today. It's loved by developers, trusted by enterprises, and most of all, we use it here at changelog. Move fast and fix things with Rollbar. Once again, rollbar.com/changelog. Welcome back, everybody. This is the Changelog, a podcast featuring the hackers, leaders, and innovators of open source. I'm Adam Stacoviak, editor-in-chief of Changelog. In this episode, Jared and I talk with Jordan Eldridge about Winamp2 JS, a re-implementation of Winamp 2.9 in HTML5 and JavaScript. For many of our listeners, talking about Winamp may bring to mind some extreme nostalgia about the internet of the past. And honestly, it's the same way for Jared and I. Jordan started this project in 2014, and it's what ultimately got the attention of some folks at Facebook, where he now works on Nuclide. We shared stories about Winamp back in the day for all of us, actually listening to music as an MP3, the technical hurdles and learning Jordan has experienced, skinning it, adding playlists, making it a front end for Spotify, which is so ironic to actually say. Also, Jared has been hacking on it via live stream on Twitch, so check the show notes for that link. And little did Jared and I know, but Jordan was a big fan of the show, which you'll learn about at the end of the show. I think the best place to actually start is by talking about this tweet that you put out first, Jared. It was like, I don't know, it was huge, right? Like it was 3,000 retweets or something. It was crazy.
Well, that might be hyperbolic, but it was definitely popular.
But that wasn't the first time to the rodeo. That was like, there was Reddit, there was Hacker News, there was other stuff. And the thing we're talking about is called Winamp2 JS. You can find it at webamp.com. Is it .com? It's not .com.
.org.
Webamp.org. Let me share some coverage here because I was actually looking this up as I was live streaming the other day, hacking on this Winamp2 JS. In the README, Jordan has press coverage. And he's been covered by TechCrunch, Gizmodo, Motherboard, the changelog, which is in a different section, but I understand. And I was looking at the different dates, and I was thinking, do we scoop these guys? So I looked at Motherboard. They covered it in like February this year. We scooped them. I was looking at TechCrunch. It was like right after, they saw Motherboard post it basically, and they covered it. And that was like February this year. We scooped them. And I was starting to feel pretty good about myself. And then I went to Gizmodo's coverage of Winamp2 JS. And it was like February, I don't know the month, but it was 2014. 2014. Wow. So props to Gizmodo for scooping this project up years ago. And I guess that helps us kind of date how long it's been around and how long you've been working on this. So tell us a little bit of the story. It's 4 years later. What was this idea and what were you doing back in 2014?
Yeah, it's a funny backstory. So I was sitting in my room, just I don't have any idea what I was doing, but a memory of Winamp skins came back to me. And I guess for anyone who doesn't remember, Winamp skins was the way that you could theme Winamp. And the implementation of it was just a zip file that contained bitmap files, which were sprite sheets. And I guess at work I had been doing some stuff with CSS sprite sheets, and suddenly this parallel kind of popped into my head that like, whoa, Winamp skins were sprite sheets, and I'm used to doing sprite sheets in CSS now. I wonder if you could sort of reconstruct the Winamp UI using CSS. And so I was like, oh, that sounds really fun. So I sat down at my computer and tried to, pull up some BMPs, realized that, hey, browsers can still play or still show BMPs just like any other image. And yeah, you could do it. And
what's a BMP?
Bitmap, it's like a very primitive, non-compressed image
I've forgotten.
Format.
Jeez.
It's been a while.
No transparency in bitmaps. But yeah, so that first little bit worked, and I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. And then I was like, well, how do you connect up the audio? And so I went and learned about web audio API stuff, and I got the main window. So it's like Winamp is broken up into 3 different windows. There's a main window, which has like play and volume and a little visualizer on there. And then there's a equalizer window, and then there's a playlist window. But I got just the first one working, and I tweeted about it because I thought, hey, maybe my friend Jake would think this is cool. And yeah, it kind of blew up. Back then was that 2014. And I think when you were saying Gizmodo picked it up, made it to Hacker News, and
it was on Hacker News
as like
as well.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like someone who was, I guess, fairly new to the sort of the mainstream tech industry. That was like, I don't know, I was like over the moon that all these, that I got posted to Hacker News, and it was kind of unbelievable. And I guess maybe just that interest was like, well, I guess I'll keep working on this. And then, 4 years later, I guess I haven't really ever thought to question whether I should stop.
How much time do you have into this?
It's a good question. So it's a long-term project, but it sort of goes in phases where I come back to it and work on it, and then sort of walk away for a while. I'm a person who likes to have a lot of different projects going in parallel, so that when I get blocked on one, rather than sort of being forced to solve a problem in a imperfect way, I can just sort of walk away until, sometime in a shower 2 months later, I'm like, oh, that's how I could do it. And then, I can come back to the project. So I really have no idea, but I, probably often will spend, 3 or 4 hours a week or more, and on busy times when I'm really feeling it, probably a lot more than that.
Oh. Reminds me of a tweet I saw recently where it was a cartoon, and we retweeted it. So if you follow us on Twitter, you'll see this, but it was a cartoon. It was a brain and saying, hey, to the person who owns the brain, essentially, hey, you going to go to sleep? And then the next pane, it says, yes, now shut up. The person talking to the brain. And the brain says, I think I figured out how to debug your program. And then suddenly the next one is the eyes wide open. It's like, just you're up now. You got to go to work.
Right.
So, it's nice to have those side projects where you can sort of like step away and do something different. In this case, it's sleep. But you get the point.
Take a shower?
Yeah, take a shower. I like that. It's you got to give yourself room. And that's an interesting.
You like taking showers? What do you say?
Well, I think it's an interesting perspective to have a reason to have many projects ongoing, so that you can break from one on blocks and still have fun and enjoy, your craft, but not get stuck and be like pulling your hair out.
And I think that's another big advantage of side projects, is that they enable you to work in that way where, rather than, being forced to solve a problem, if you don't have a good solution, you can just say, oh, okay, putting that one on hold. And, either I'll decide that it's important to come back and, hack something in and move forward with something imperfect, or, hey, I'll just, sit it on the back burner and let it stew for a while. Whereas, in work, like, hey, you gotta ship, otherwise you're not going to get your paycheck.
So there's kind of two kinds of people, and probably a sliding scale between them. You have people with a bunch of ideas and no time to do them, or maybe just enough time to work on one or two. And then you have people with a lot of time and no ideas. And then, like I said, there's a sliding scale. But Jordan, you seem like the kind of guy who's got lots of ideas, and you also execute on some of them. At least we've seen Winamp2. We'll also probably get around to talking about URL.me, which is cool as well. Where do your ideas come from? And like, can you give somebody advice? Like, I can't think of a cool side project. How do you initiate a cool side project?
It's really funny, because I spent a lot of time feeling like I was in that first camp where I had all this time and like I really wanted to be doing something cool, or to be like participating, but I didn't feel like I had any ideas. And I think, as you pointed out, now I'm sort of transitioned into this other situation where I've got, more things that I want to do than I have time in which to do them. And I was looking back at, all these projects that I've done, and I'm definitely like a side project kind of oriented person. And I realized that the one like theme throughout them is trying to do something in a medium in which that thing is surprising. So with like Winamp2 JS, it's like, I think it's somewhat surprising that you can do as much as you can, that you can re-implement sort of to the level of detail that is possible inside of the browser, which is a pretty tight constraint. And with URL meme, which you said we might get into later, which is like a meme generator where the URL is the user interface. So you should be able to generate a sort of, quote unquote meme image by just typing a URL. It's again, like, I think a surprising thing that you could actually do that. And looking back at all my projects, I think that's sort of the recurring theme. And the inspiration then I think ends up coming from understanding the technology and thinking about the things, learning about the features of the technology, and then those ideas sort of bubbling around in your brain and overlapping with other things that you've come across in your life. So, this example of Winamp being inspired really by this idea of CSS sprite sheets overlapping with my memory of, hacking on Winamp skins as a teenager.
Right.
So I think, I wish I had like a direct, like, go do this thing and you will have great ideas. But I think really it was when I started having a deeper understanding of technology and exploring sort of the edges of, obscure APIs and things like that, that these ideas started coming to me more regularly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when I look at Winamp2 JS, and, Adam and I also often discuss like what makes something interesting or what makes it popular or what resonates with developers, because those are things that I think intellectually stimulate us. And obviously we're in the, arena of covering those kind of things and talking about them. And, Winamp2 JS specifically had two things going for it. The first was an extreme amount of nostalgia that it invokes to most people who, were around, either, I guess, in the formative years or older in the late 90s, right? Early 2000s, when it was very popular. And then secondly, this little bit of a surprise factor, that impresses you that you can actually do this in the browser. Like, it has those two aspects to it, which makes it very, I don't say necessarily viral. I guess it had waves of coverage, and has resonated with so many people. Yeah, it's sticky. Thank you.
It's sticky. I mean, like, you turn back somebody's time a little bit, especially somebody who's actually used this to play music, not just look at as this thing here, which is cool, of course, but somebody who's used it and managed playlists and, fine tune the EQ to their favorite rock song or whatever. Like, you kind of bring out this inner child, this childlike joy that we don't often get to face because, you're stuck on a block and you don't got enough side projects, or you got to ship because you got to get a paycheck, as you said earlier. Like, you give that back and then you're like, oh, then go one step further and dig a little further into this open source code base that if you want to learn something, hey, this is how you learned it.
Yeah, I think the nostalgia angle is really huge. And I think, if I have any advice for like how to come up with a side project that is going to generate interest, it's, ride somebody else's coattails as far as possible. Because really that's, that's what it is. This thing has gotten, like posted in a bunch of places with, comments. And every time I read through the comments, maybe 5% are actually about the project. And the rest of the comments like, oh man, Winamp, I still use Winamp, or Winamp was the best and everything, more recent is garbage. But and I think, that was the same impetus for me doing it, was I have, like you said, this sort of emotional memory of this MP3 player from a time that was formative for me, both, as a person, right? Like music as a teenager, which I think is probably the people with whom this is resonating the best. The way that you consume music as a teenager has got to make an imprint on you, because music is so important, I think, in your teenage and college years. And so I think much in the same way that's what has maybe driven the interest in this, it was also what drove my own personal interest in it, was, wanting to recreate those experiences. In fact, I said that the original idea came from Winamp skins, and that was actually, I think, the first like constructive thing I ever did on a computer. Where I went from a consumer of software to, creating something from nothing, which is, I think, a really powerful moment for probably almost any programmer can remember that first moment when you like sat down at a computer and then sometime later a thing existed that didn't exist before, only out of, your time and your brain. There were no, you didn't have to go to the store and buy parts. It was just your idea made something new in the world. And that experience, I think, even though, I was making the world's ugliest Winamp skin that never saw the light of day, and nor should it have. But I think that was really formative, and I see a direct line from that experience through, to writing software today. The experience of working on Winamp2 JS definitely feels like that same kind of joy of sitting down at a computer and making something, that didn't exist before exist just from your own, time and mental energy.
Yeah. Well, Winamp definitely has those same warm, fuzzy feelings for me as well. I didn't take it as far as you. I didn't actually create skins, but I do remember this was like specifically for me is attached to Napster in the timeline in terms of like what was happening at the same time. And it was like, you're waiting for your files to download, right? And they were taking forever because the internet was slow back then. And while you do that, what do you do? Well, I'm just out there downloading, Winamp skins and swapping them in and out and, creating playlists and just wasting, hours upon hours. And I never quite made it across the void like you did to like, I'm going to create my own. But it definitely had, down the road, I had times where I peeled back the covers and saw the power of programming. Adam, were you a Winamp user back in the day?
I was, and actually, your story reminded me when it talks about skinning was skinning forums. That was a huge thing. I can't remember the most well-known forum. Maybe you all might remember the brand name of it, but it was the most used. And skinning those and skinning Winamp was like the coolest thing. And I was never cool enough to do either.
I totally remember having these downloading these skins and just being like, oh my God, the people who made these must be like, the most massive, kings among men. And, oh my gosh, to be one of those people who can, make these amazing works of art. It's been interesting. I've actually been able to, through this project, end up connecting up with a couple of people who were, sort of big time skinners back in the day and had made some of these very cool skins. And it's really funny, having a little bit more perspective in life, getting to talk to those people. And, certainly the work that they did was really incredible, but the outsized presence that those people had in my mind as a teenager is really funny to look back on, these days.
Someone out there is screaming VB Bulletin because that's what it's called. VB Bulletin. Nice. Or V Bulletin, I guess, is probably, and not VB. V Bulletin.
Was that a specific website or was that just the forum software that all
That's the forum software. I think that was like the most popular and a couple others that I recall, but Envision, I think, might have been the other one.
PHPBB. What year did that come out?
That's the one I was thinking of, PHPBB.
I was thinking Envision and then V Bulletin and PHPB as well. That was in the mix too. But you'd hang out on these forums. You'd find people to connect with. Like, this is the old days of the internet, and like I guess you still do that, but like that was the only way then. That was pre-blogs, where it was like on the cusp of blogs,
right? And
it was totally in the era of like Napster and downloading music when it was. You did it not because you wanted to steal. You did it because it was new. It was. Maybe I was probably poor then too, but. So I probably had to. I couldn't afford it. But I don't think I did it because it was like, I want to steal your stuff. It was more like, that's how you do it now, I guess. I mean, the world's changing. I don't know. MP3s, give it to me.
That's right.
Yeah, I think it's hard to untangle the experience of Winamp from the experience of, digital media, digital audio being available for the very first time, and sort of just skyrocketing into the mainstream. And, suddenly this huge availability of music and the ability to just ingest, music from all over with very little friction. I think everybody who went from, through that transition from, oh, you only get music at a CD store when you can drop, $10-15 on a CD, to, oh, everything is suddenly available to me at my fingertips. And I think that feeling is probably a very important, potent part of the emotional reaction that people have to Winamp. Yeah. I would guess.
And not just music that you could buy at the CD store. Is that a thing? The CD
when you
store?
said CD store, I was like, CD store? That's interesting.
Yeah, what is
Not
it called?
Music store.
Music store.
A record store?
Record store. That's, yeah. So it has been a while, hasn't it?
Actually labeled it by the media type. CD store.
We used to go to the MP3 store. But actually, like new music, like things that didn't exist outside of the digital, right? Like the covers and the remixes and these like the MIDI stuff. There was so much
bootlegs.
New.
Yeah,
bootlegs. But one thing I wanted to ask both of you guys, I guess, open question, because as developers, like even asking Jordan, like what's something that, what's some secrets to creating something that will resonate with the community? Thinking about Winamp, I mean, in this case, you're tapping into the love of Winamp to a certain degree. But if we're thinking about Winamp as a software product and what people loved about it, we want to create things that people love, right? That gives them value and joy. Are there lessons we can learn aside from the one that it's attached to music and that was also formative and important to people? What was it about Winamp that we all loved about it? Was it the customizability? Was it the interface? What do you guys think?
Right time, right place.
That's all?
I mean, it was cool, but what else competed? Like you might have had like Windows Media Player maybe.
Yeah.
There was nothing that was like that was catchy, sticky, that allowed you to, like Jordan said earlier, become the creator, something from nothing. I don't think Windows wanted you to change their media player. So that might have been the customizability of it and the timing.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're kind of spot on with the timing, but I think there's another aspect to it as well, which is that it was a little bit punk. I think at that time the MP3 algorithm was still like under you couldn't use it without a license.
That's right, yeah.
And then somebody like leaked it or something like that. Someone probably knows the story better than I do, but there was the Fraunhofer Institute or whatever. Somebody like leaked the source to a MP3 decoder engine, and suddenly it basically became possible for anyone to integrate it. And I don't know what the legal implications of that were, but I think basically that like patent suddenly became indefensible. And so I think Winamp was one of the first to like sort of jump on that and be like, no, we're shipping this, inside free software. I guess that's another thing that's a big piece of it, is that it was, shareware or freeware or whatever, which I think was also, another thing of that time.
Yeah, it didn't cost anything.
Exactly.
And it had the catchiest song, or not the song, but like the tagline. I mean,
it did have. I mean, that does play into the punk, or at least it had attitude, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that's attributable back to the sort of the main guy, Justin Frankel, who created it. And maybe your listeners know sort of the story of him, that after he sold Winamp, or I guess he and Nullsoft sold Winamp to AOL. There were a number of stories about his behavior within AOL, because he was then on contracted to or to stay on the project for some number of years, but he did not fit in at AOL at all. And so he was like releasing peer-to-peer file sharing software like on AOL's website against his boss's wishes, and like a bunch of other stuff, after they, paid him millions and millions of dollars payday.
Yeah, so according to the history books, they sold it to AOL in 1999 for $80 million. And the nostalgia for Winamp 2 specifically, because like you didn't build Winamp2 JS or Winamp 5 JS, even though these things exist, is that once AOL took it over, it lost a lot of the things that people loved. There's a major rewrite, new UI. It was very AOL, which is like anti-punk, right? Like it's like the most mainstream thing company at the time. And so like another reason why I'm thinking why it's so nostalgic is because it reminds us of a better piece of software than currently exists, and kind of like the glory days.
Yeah. Well, it was fast, and I think we have a lot of, maybe as a JavaScript developer, and I feel this a little bit more cutting than others, but this sort of rebelling against modern high level languages, which are comparatively slow and resource heavy. Hey, it was fast, and it was graphically beautiful, or I guess depending on your aesthetic tastes. But yeah, I think the fact that it was a singular vision from a very singular person, I think, and then it was just well executed on top of that, and it wasn't compromised into any kind of corporate requirement, right? It was like, this was the thing that Justin wanted to build, and that, I think, has a lot of power.
This episode is brought to you by Linode, our cloud server of choice. It's so easy to get started. Head to linode.com/changelog, pick a plan, pick a distro, and pick a location, and in minutes deploy your Linode cloud server. They have drool-worthy hardware, native SSD cloud storage, 40 gigabit network, Intel E5 processors, simple, easy control panel, 99.9% uptime guaranteed. We are never down. 24/7 customer support, 10 data centers, 3 regions, anywhere in the world, they got you covered. Head to linode.com/changelog to get $20 in hosting credit. That's 4 months free. Once again, linode.com/changelog.
So Jordan, you've been working on this off and on for 4+ years. Surely it's taken different forms. I notice now it's built with React and Redux. Those things didn't exist in 2014. So take us through some of the history of the software itself, maybe some technical hurdles or interesting bits, and we can talk about all that's packed into Winamp2 JS.
Yeah. So originally, it was written in jQuery, and I think it didn't last very long in that form. But I honestly didn't know JavaScript at all when I started the project. Like, I was trying to figure out, like, how do you make a class, which of course is not a thing, or like, how do you split this across multiple files?
What were you used to coding in at the time? Like, what's your original language?
I was just writing, bad PHP and bad jQuery, like stitching together plugins and whatnot. And it was really this project that taught me JavaScript. I was curious about it, and so I'd come home each night eager to try to make it better. And as part of that, I ran up against my own, limitations of knowledge. And so, I kept having to learn, like, okay, how do you actually, like I said, make a class or learn about prototypical inheritance and whatnot. And so I wrote it all in jQuery at first. It was very primitive at that point. It didn't do very much. And then pretty quickly I realized that this wasn't really the right way to go about it. And so I rewrote it all in just what we call vanilla JavaScript without any framework at all. And it existed in that form for quite a while until I started to run up against limitations of that. And having learned a little bit about React at that point, I realized that this sort of declarative nature of being able to, rather than managing transition between states, just managing state and then a projection of that state into DOM state seemed like it made made sense for this problem.
Were those the bumps that you were hitting with the vanilla JS version? If you recall back then, like, what were the particular aspects? Was it just like crazy amounts of state everywhere and you having to react to it, or
Yes. So I think that I think the main thing is when you don't have this declarative sort of React model of your UI being a function of your state, you end up managing the transition between every state. And so then you get this, like, the complexity of your application is exponential of the number of states that you have, because you have to manage the transition between all of, any two states have to be able to go between them. And so I was running into that with, as I was adding more and more detail, the pain of maintaining that just, was rapidly exploding. And so I felt a switch was necessary. And so, I switched to React and Redux. I think from there, it was a pretty good fit for that model. But I think the real technical limitations were not, like in the framework decision, but in the, some of these, like I think I said earlier about trying to do things which are surprising in a medium. So like, can you do the things that you can do in JavaScript that you might not think you could do? And some of those technical challenges, I think, were a little bit more interesting. I think the most interesting one is, Winamp2 JS actually loads actual skin files. And getting to do that inside the browser posed a bunch of interesting technical challenges. And I could go into that or not, but I think those kinds of problems were much more sort of interesting than what framework to use.
Yeah. And that was a surprise to me. I assumed it was just going to be looking like Winamp and like the play button works and all that. But the fact that you can click the upper left-hand corner and swap skins was awesome. And then when I actually cloned the code down, because I was dorking around with it, and I saw like, no, these are actually just skin. Like, this is not some sort of like he didn't remake these skins, right? These are the actual. Can you go download off of Adam's old vBulletin forums? Can you go download an old skin and pop it into Winamp2 JS and it'll work?
Yeah, if you can just drag it from your desktop right on top of it, and it'll bloop, and it'll change.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so
that's what I say when I'm in complete disbelief. You can do that.
Yeah. It's a bunch of it's hacks on top of hacks to get it to work inside the browser. But I think once I realized that Winamp skins were just zip files of bitmaps, and someone has written a JavaScript zip utility, it's like, well, okay, you can do it, I guess.
So it unzips them, and how does it work? I mean, you said you hit some hurdles there.
Yeah. So
some hacks.
The first step is, right, of course, unzipping this binary blob, and then you get access to these bitmap files, and then of course you need to treat those bitmap files can't just be used directly, because those are sprites, and anyone who's done stuff with sprites might know that one of the limitations of sprites is that you can't do like repeating tiles using sprites very easily, because you'll end up repeating the whole sprite sheet. So we end up like extracting the zip file, getting the sprite sheets out of the zip file, rendering those into a canvas, slicing the individual sprites out of that canvas into like a data URI. And then, given those data URIs, well, you might think like, oh, I can just set these as like background images on, using JavaScript. But in many cases, you have to apply them to like pseudo elements. So like, like the hover state of an item, or the like handle of a slider. And there's no way to do that from JavaScript. So what it ends up being is we get these data URIs, and then we dynamically generate a CSS style sheet, and then inject that into the DOM. So none of those things are particularly beautiful, but it does work. It does work.
Which, with a side project, it does work is pretty much what you're after, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think actually the thing that was most interesting about it was not only does it work, but I feel pretty confident that even though it's not the right, it doesn't feel like a clean solution, it is the only solution. And I think having an excuse to do something terrible, where you're still doing the right thing, is, I think when I know I'm having fun.
So when you drop the W whatever file, WSZ, while you guys are talking, I was hacking on some fun stuff here. Does it actually upload it into your UI and then like depack? Because it happened pretty quickly. I drug one on there and it changed it in real fast.
Yeah. So I think one of the limitations I set for myself for this project is there's no server component, right? So it's just JavaScript. So everything happens inside your browser. So when you add the file, when you drag the file in, I get access to, a reference to that file, and I can get access to the bits in that file. And so, it all goes from there inside your browser.
Wow. Well, that was something you brought up actually in your Twitch live stream yesterday. Yep. And I was thinking like that would be super cool. And then I was thinking, where do you even begin? I don't know.
1997, I think, is where you got to start.
Yeah, you got to go back in time. Where do you begin, Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you want to make a skin, all you really need to do, I guess what you do is you go Google Skinner's Atlas, which was in 1998, sort of the canonical reference for how to write Winamp skins, and actually was hugely valuable to me trying to re-implement all this stuff, right? Because not only do I have to really fundamentally know how these skins get used in order to recreate the Winamp UI, to a high degree of detail. And it's a bunch of bitmap files in a zip that's been renamed, and then there's a number of like config files in there as well. So some INI files and whatnot, which of course I also have to parse.
It's tangential, of course, but in this journey of yours, having to go to all these obscure, to some degree, kind of older websites that have information that not a lot of people are actually looking for anymore. You got to deal with all these ads everywhere and this weird old school web too.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe kind of new school. There's ads everywhere now. It's just like, is that a download skin button or is that an ad?
Right. Yeah,
both.
It has been an interesting experience with sort of understanding bit rot, and how, these things that we sort of took for granted being around are not necessarily going to be around forever unless someone cares. As part of that, I actually, this actually goes a little bit into one of the things that spun out of this project was I wrote, someone suggested I write a Twitter bot which tweets out Winamp skins. So if you go to twitter.com/Winamp skins, I have a little bot there which once or twice a day will tweet out a screenshot of a Winamp skin and a link to webamp.org with that skin turned on. But just as an effort to sort of preserve some of these, these things that people put a huge amount of effort into and are really, iconic of that era. And sometimes it's because they're just like really incredible and the craftsmanship that went into them and whatnot. But sometimes it's because they're pretty atrocious. And you're like, why is there a worm, protruding from your MP3 player? That's a little bit strange, but it's impressive, I guess. So yeah, I think, I certainly didn't set out on this project with any kind of noble ambition, but I think in retrospect, if there is anything really valuable that has come out of it, it's that it has, it does provide a way to take these, artistic artifacts, which were becoming sort of increasingly hard to share or to experience, and sort of lower the barrier to entry there. And in fact, I reached out to some folks at the Internet Archive, and looking into maybe ways that we could have a collection of Winamp skins up there on the Internet Archive.
It's a great idea. Did they?
Yeah, I think like
answer
three.
Back?
I tweeted something, and a friend of mine tagged somebody else who I guess works there as a volunteer there, and was like, "Yes, give me all of them in any format." And so I still have to follow up with him and figure out exactly what what we can do, and whether I think my main goal would be like if we could get a great UI for experiencing them and integrate it with Winamp2 JS. But I don't know whether that's more than they want to take on.
So it looks like you can actually, by checking out your tweets, it looks like you can actually inject a skin via URL.
Yeah, if you pass a sort of carefully crafted JSON in the hash of the URL, you can inject either an MP3 or a skin. Now, MP3s and skins are both a little tricky because cross-origin headers and whatnot. So I haven't exposed. That's something that a lot of users have asked for, is this ability to, and in fact, Winamp itself could do this. You could paste in a URL and it would play it for you. But alas, due to the cross-origin restrictions, more often than not, that experience is not going to actually be good for the user. So I've opted to not expose it in the UI.
So as part of that, a side effect or a side conversation might be: are you cataloging these things in an S3 bucket or something like that, or because it looks like it's on Amazon AWS? Is this you kind of collecting these as you tweet these?
Yeah. So I got some huge zip file of many thousands of MP3 of skins, and I've been sort of reviewing them and looking through them and picking ones that I thought were notable, I guess. So
Pac-Man. I mean, Pac-Man Fever, that was super cool. March 10th.
Yeah.
That's notable.
So there are definitely I try to pick ones which are either interesting, not necessarily because they're great, but because they are interesting. So I try to include the ones that are, great, and also the ones that are surprisingly not great. But yeah, then I push them up to S3 because they do have to be available somewhere, and that's a pretty fast server, and it's for me to host them there. And then
somebody's not going to change the URL contents for you, like you're pointing to something. Oh, let me just change out this image for something malicious or just whatever.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So here's an idea. I'm still stuck on changelog skin, so I'm trying to think of ways of getting this done. So here's the plan. So to the listening audience, this episode of the changelog, Jordan has agreed to host it indefinitely at webamp.org, which is his website for Winamp2 JS. Maybe we'll talk about names in a second. webamp.org/changelog. We'll link that up in the show notes. When you go to that page, you can listen to this episode inside Winamp2 JS. Now, how cool would it be if anybody out there, created a changelog skin that we can use on that player? So it's branded, super cool, right? So if you have skills, even if you don't have any skills, you got time and you want to try this out, contact us. We would love to work with you. We even have like a brand guideline you could use. So you have all of our colors, our fonts, like everything you need. And
or you could just pull all the colors from our style sheets too on the .com.
Well,
I'm fully on board with this. I think this would be great.
Awesome. So that's skins. Let's talk about other features because it's really quite functional. Like you can even you can separate the different segments, drag them around separately. You can resize. What all is in here that maybe doesn't people don't know?
Yeah, I think it's
just by looking at it
taken on the form of like a puzzle box. In that it's sort of you open it up and it's like, oh yeah, I can click play, but under the hood the more you dig, I think the more little details that I guess just bothered me enough that I decided to do them will reveal themselves. So I think the simplest one is just you play and there's like a visualizer, right? So there's two different kinds of visualizer. If you click on it in the main window, it'll go between this sort of like bar graph visualizer and a line graph visualizer, and that's all hooked up through the web audio API. The equalizer works, so you can you can twiddle the different levels of the different frequency bands, and again that works actually pretty simply through the web audio API. Once you work around a bug that I discovered in Safari, which depending on how you ordered things in the web audio API, it would just like hard crash, like seg fault Safari. So that took me like 3 months to figure out. But those are good ones. And then I think the window management has been interesting too. So, like I said, I released this first version, back in 2014, and it was just the main window at that point. And then going from one window to two windows, suddenly there was a huge amount of additional extra layer of work required. So, you can drag these windows around, but Winamp had this great feature where, most of the time you probably want them sort of stuck to each other. You want the windows sort of arranged, but you want them to form a single unit. And so it had like snap. So if you drag two windows close to each other, they'll sort of align directly. So getting that to work was quite a bit of effort. And in fact, just recently, another piece of that is, the windows have this like shade mode, where they'll like collapse down to just their title bar. And Winamp again has this interesting UI feature where if you have two windows, one on top of the other, and you put the top window into shade mode, all the lower windows will sort of travel along with it. And so like getting that to work was another bunch of effort. Let's see, just laundry list of other things. It can parse the binary equalizer format files that Winamp can generate, and it can also generate them. So if you like set the equalizer to a particular level, you can export that as a binary file and then like drag it in to bring it back to that level. The playlist works, and you can export your current playlist as a HTML file, which again Winamp could do.
What's this file type, EQF?
It's pretty simple. I had never actually had to do anything with binary file formats, so it was my first entry into that kind of world, which is good. Again, I learned a lot, but it's very simple. It's just like a name and then like 11 values between 0 and 255.
So why can you save a preset for the equalizer, not the playlists? Is it completely different? Is it like just a JSON? Would you kind of modernize it, or would you sort of still go old school with it?
So you're saying like why can you save the export of the equalizer, but you can't like export your playlist?
Yeah,
which I think Winamp also uses like the M3U format. Yeah, it's another thing people have asked for, and the reason is that there's like I don't have direct access to your file system. So if you came back, if you had dragged in your Matrix soundtrack to listen to, and then you tried to export that playlist. Nice choice. And then you load up that playlist again, I can't go look on your file system and find those files for you. And so like while I could certainly read and generate M3U files, I can't actually do anything useful with them. So it's again one of these limitations of the browser where you can do a lot, but you can't do everything.
Now, maybe my memory isn't serving me, but like this snap you mentioned before, when the different panes snap together, that just seems like exactly how Winamp used to work. Is that exactly? I mean, as much as you can, or am I just having like backwards nostalgia where I think this is like the real thing?
As much as possible, I've tried very carefully to recreate everything exactly, and partially it's just because it's kind of fun to do. But also it's actually kind of freeing as an engineer who, even with the most well-defined spec, I think any project ultimately ends up being a lot of judgment calls as an engineer of like, okay, how should this thing actually work to be the best? And there's something kind of liberating about not having to make that decision ever, and just knowing like, okay, the spec is this thing, right? I want it to behave exactly like this, for better or for worse. So yeah, it's like I was literally slow-mo screen capturing actual Winamp in a VM to see how many pixels away it is until it snaps. And I guess to say for better or for worse, there are some cases where Winamp has bugs where things don't behave in a quite sensible way, where I've actually gone ahead and re-implemented those bugs just because for me, that's kind of more interesting than trying to make the best MP3 player, just to make the one that already exists.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at GoCD. GoCD is an open source continuous delivery server built by ThoughtWorks. Check them out at gocd.org or on GitHub at github.com/GoCD. GoCD provides continuous delivery out of the box with its built-in pipelines, advanced traceability, and value stream visualization. With GoCD, you can easily model, orchestrate, and visualize complex workflows from end to end with no problem. They support Kubernetes and modern infrastructure with elastic on-demand agents and cloud deployments. To learn more about GoCD, visit gocd.org/changelog. It's free to use, and they have professional support and enterprise add-ons available from ThoughtWorks. Once again, gocd.org/changelog. So I'm thinking about how this works. It actually works, not just looks like it works, but it actually works. And you've thought through all this cool stuff and even recreated bugs. And I'm thinking like, we're talking about usefulness and exporting playlists and equalization and all that fun stuff. But like, could this be like a front end to say Spotify's API, for example?
Yeah, there have been a lot of people who, where they pull it up and they're like, oh my gosh, you can really drag in MP3s? That's so cool. Let me go find an MP3. Oh yeah, I don't have any MP3s anymore. And so there've been a lot of requests for like, okay, how do you take this thing, which is, really just a gimmick, right? It's a web page. You can go to it and you go, oh, neat. And then you move on with your life. But there've been a number of people who have thought like, okay, how do you turn this into something that's actually, useful? And so I think the ones that I've seen are, like you said, the Spotify people want it to integrate with Spotify. And
they want it?
Yeah. People.
What? Okay. This isn't just you. This is them poaching you. All right, cool. Let's hear more.
No, not necessarily Spotify wants it, but well, actually, okay.
The people of Spotify, not Spotify the company.
Stepping back. So Spotify,
is that like
Spotify
people at Walmart?
People actually Spotify did have a player called SpottyAmp, which was a like C Winamp clone that you could run on your desktop if you had a Spotify like premium account. And I wish I could remember the name of the guy who did that, because he's a notable guy. But he was working at Spotify, and he built this Winamp clone that you could download and run, and it would interact with Spotify. And I think they had some licensing issues with it. And then I think ultimately there was a whole to-do about people were using the library, the underlying library, which that thing used, as a hacking monetization model. So they were like creating fake Spotify accounts, and then they would like hack into arbitrary people's computers and like play tracks on those Spotify author accounts tracks, and then make the like revenue from having their tracks listened to a bunch. And so eventually Spotify had to shut down that, or they chose to, I guess, shut down that thing. So yeah, Spotify itself, I think at least some people within Spotify would like to see a Winamp interface. And they do have this API that's available online. And I don't know for sure, but I think it might have something to do with the new DRM enabled APIs in the browser. And that's a whole other conversation. But because of the DRM, we can't get direct access to the audio stream. And so there are some features which don't work. So the equalizer can't work because we can't twiddle the bits in the way that we need to. And the visualizer can't work. And the balance can't work. So for now, and unless maybe a bunch of these things get added as, on top of the existing web APIs, for now, those things can't work. Someone has a copy working. And I once I think that solidifies a little bit, I'll share that. But because it basically can't work fully, I think I'm not going to include it in the core. But today there's Dropbox integration. So you can, if you go to the options menu and you say like open a file or play file, you can pick from your Dropbox folder.
Can you actually point it at a Dropbox folder and that becomes a playlist?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can Dropbox has a little file picker UI, and you just pick from there and it will populate your playlist with a directory of files.
Oh, wow. While you were talking about that too, I was also thinking about just alternate ways to use this. Could be that would make a really sweet looking iPhone interface or even mobile interface, because it's vertical, and the playlist can be the top 2 sections are essentially the same height, and then the bottom one is the same height too, but I guess it's variable in the fact that you can scroll to see more playlists. That could be one more place to take it.
Well, the touch targets
I've done some work to get it to work, to make sure it works on mobile, and it does work. But yeah, I think the touch target issue is pretty devastating. That you can't really click on anything. Although it does bring to mind, I don't know where does back when the iPhone was still like a myth, that people were doing all these mock-ups of what an iPhone would look like based on what a mobile phone looked like and what an iPod looked like. But someone did this like mock-up
Yeah.
of a like hardware web amp or hardware Winamp, which is I'll see if I can track it down. Maybe it's can stick in the show notes, but it's pretty incredible. It's literally just like a little, candy bar size hardware device that looks like Winamp UI on the top with like a headphone cable coming out of it.
Yeah, definitely share that with us, and we will add it to the show notes. Let's talk about the name you just mentioned, WebAmp again. We've been calling it Winamp2 JS. Surely there's a story there. There's always a story with names.
So Winamp2 JS was, I guess, the name I came up with originally, just because I thought it was the most terse explanation of what the project was. Right? It's Winamp2 in JavaScript. And shortly after I tweeted it that first time, I got a tweet response from Tom Pepper, who I guess was one of the very early people at Nullsoft, along with Justin Frankel. And he said, like, hey, congratulations from Nullsoft. We have these domains if you want them. So that was webamp.com, .org, and .net. And I guess I think they maybe had some internal project or something like that at some point of doing some kind of web thing, and it never came to fruition. And I don't know how he came into possession of those domains or whatever. But I guess there was long story short, there might have been some legal complications about getting me those domains, but I have them now, except for .com, which I got scooped up. But so I thought it was very cool to have like a much more shareable URL than was currently like on my own jordaneldridge.com domain with 3 subdirectories down. So I thought I might as well take advantage of these this domain because it seems like a cool place for it to live. But I guess I haven't fully committed to changing the name and introducing the complete confusion of like you said, news articles or other things that talk about it as Winamp2 JS, and then that not being the canonical name anymore. But it felt
like a code name or something.
The new name, but I guess it's like too late now. There's going to be confusion. It's just a matter of like, where does that confusion live?
What's crazy is that you create this thing, you tweet about it, and then the originators of Nullsoft, what did you say his name was again?
Tom Pepper.
Tom Pepper. I love that name too. It's such a cool name. Yeah, I think Tom Pepper reaches out to you and says, hey, I got some, we have some domains we can probably give you. So why did you not get the .com? What happened there?
Let's see. How do I phrase this? So he wasn't able to actually give me the domains. But in the intervening years, they did expire rather conveniently. But I wasn't watching closely enough.
I see. Okay, so
it's a bit delicately put, but that's what.
Yeah, I'm reading. Everybody else read between the lines there. We're not going to repeat it because it's just too close. It's too close. But this is crazy though. So like a long time ago, you kind of got nostalgic and you wanted to play with this back in whatever you released this 2014, and then now you're doing this. I think this is such a crazy journey. This is open source at its best.
I think it really is. There haven't been a ton of contributors. I can say, there have been people who have like popped in and done a thing or two that they thought was interesting. I think most notably the addition of actually parsing the skin file in the browser using that JavaScript library was a very early pull request. But I think the amount of input that has influenced, how it's evolved has been really tremendous. Just people, popping up and be like, hey, did you know like this obscure thing about the web audio API that would allow you to do this other thing that you probably want to do? And so, it really has been, like while most of the code has been commits that I've written myself, a lot of the, core ideas or breakthroughs did come from people in the community. And the attention that it got has really enabled that in a way that I certainly, without people knowing about it, their ability to come in and lend their particular expertise, I don't think would be possible.
It may not be open source traditionally in the fact that you said there's not that many contributors. However, it's not as if like this is code you have behind the firewall, nobody can see. And I think that is inviting for those with knowledge to contribute, whether it's a direct code contribution or a, hey, did you know about being open source in the open with no, at this point, I assume, commercial intentions, that's the cool thing. Like, why would you do this not open source? That it would only make sense to do it open source.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are friends of mine or whatnot have seen like, oh man, like you got, I think when it got on TechCrunch, that was like, it felt pretty hilarious to me that something like this would get written up in a publication like that. But, when I was telling my friends, how cool that was, and they're like, wow, like now that you've really, hit the mainstream, like
you've made it.
Are you going to start putting ads on there? You're going to, what's the monetization strategy? Yeah.
Okay. Wait.
Yeah.
What's the monetization strategy? Well, how are you going to make money from this?
I know what it is. You just sit there and wait for AOL to call.
Right.
It'll happen.
And
they're like, no, wait, don't we already own that?
No, they sold it off. They'll buy it again.
We'll buy it again. Let's one more try.
I very strictly do not have any interest in that. I guess, the answer to my monetization strategy has been to do something really interesting, hope that people who know or who care see it, and then that has like a positive influence on my career trajectory. And that actually is directly true in that my current job at Facebook was the result of a recruiter reaching out who had seen this project. And then in my interview loop, I think 2 of the engineers I talked with had seen it. So it gave us something really interesting to talk about. So I guess don't discount, just having something be visible as a monetization strategy by just, improving your career. And of course, I think all of that is secondary to all the things I learned working on the project.
How much of this overlaps with things you do day to day? Like how much has what you've done at day job, either at Facebook or elsewhere, kind of led back into this or vice versa?
It's actually, I think the vice versa is actually more the case in that I started working on this project and then I got really into JavaScript and, in order to do some of the things that I wanted to do here, I had to dig pretty deep into understanding the language and, some of the web APIs and whatnot. And I got really fired up about JavaScript. And at my previous company, the sort of state of the JavaScript code base was a little bit lacking. And so then I sort of got on this warpath about improving things there. And then that led, to me sort of evolving into a very JavaScript centric role there, sort of heading up the JavaScript infrastructure at that company. And then of course that had a feedback loop to learning a lot more. So I think it really was like, this project gave me the impetus to go really deep on some of these things, which then had, value in my career. And then there was a feedback loop on top of that.
What you're not condoning is that the only way you get hired is by having side projects, right?
No, I'm not condoning that, but I do.
But you're saying that it could help.
I do think that finding something that you're passionate about, and certainly if you ideally like you should do that at your work, and ideally you can do both of those things too, right? Like you can have a project at work that you really care about, and you can have other things on top of that if you wish. But I think in the interview process, having something that you really like have like you're fired up about, and that you've thought about in that like sort of all-consuming way, I think comes across. And whether that thing is like because you were able to find that alignment with your day job, or whether that thing is something that you found on the side, is certainly a personal choice.
So I'm a big fan of experimentation myself, and in fact, if people listen to our previous episode, probably 2 episodes back now,
Suze,
about live coding on Twitch with Suze Hinton, you will be happy to hear that she has convinced us to actually begin live streaming some code. And I've had a couple of sessions now, committing to doing some experimentations every Monday afternoon, roughly U.S. time.
2:00.
If you're
You've been on time too,
I guess.
Well, 2:00 Central.
Guy. I like to be on time.
Yeah, Monday.
That's right. Which is like 4 a.m. Australia time. So, which I found out by one of our Australian friends in Slack, who was a bit disappointed, but I think he understands. I think if you live in Australia, you're kind of used to a lot of stuff happening in the U.S.
Yeah. Well, the cool thing is you got the playback, though. You got the videos going on. So the first one you didn't, but the second one you did, so now you can get the playback.
That's right. So if you're interested in that, twitch.tv/changelog underscore.
Hey, Twitch, if you know us and you like us, give us /changelog, please. Please. Somebody out there.
Get that underscore out of there.
us.
Nobody wants it. For the time being, changelog underscore, of course. You can also just go to our website and find a place to click on that. Follow us on there if you want to live code with me on Monday afternoons. And I've been hacking on Winamp2 JS. So Jordan had a sweet idea, which is kind of morphed into what we talked about earlier with the webamp.org/changelog view. But how could we get a specialized player, maybe even on changelog.com? And so we've been experimenting with getting Winamp2 loaded into our site and running. And I'm happy to report that that worked. And it played one of our episodes served locally. But hit some road bumps, as Jordan said. There's people that are hacking on this, but not too many outside contributions. So the thing that we hit first, and they're still kind of stuck at, is there doesn't seem to be much of a public API. It seems like the way you built it, it's very much for the single use of I'm loading a single page with just this on it in the middle, which hilariously also threw me for a loop. Because instead of it being in the middle of the viewport, it's actually in the middle of the page. And you're not used to there being a scroll. Well, our homepage is quite long. And so it took me 15 to 20 minutes to realize, oh, it's actually working. It's just like completely outside of the viewport.
That's funny.
Which was fun.
I missed that live stream. So I missed that.
Yeah. The video's out there. I think it's about like an hour and 4 minutes or something. I linked it into our Slack, but it made for one of those joyous programming moments when you realize something is working, and then you also realize you just wasted a half an hour thinking that it wasn't working. But
Jordan's laughing over there. He's enjoying it.
Well, Jordan was actually kind enough to hop into that live stream and actually give me some feedback as I was dorking around with the code and trying to figure out how to use it. So that was fun as well. But when we talk about what's coming down the roadmap, my hope is some sort of API so that we can at least invoke it from a outside party. Maybe pass it some metadata and a track or a playlist or something.
I think the common wisdom is that open source works really well for libraries and not very well for applications. And I think this is sort of in a middle ground there where it's not quite low level enough to work with most of the abstractions that open source relies upon. And having a actual UI widget that works on other people's pages, that people can just npm install is, I think, not. I guess web components was supposed to try to solve this, but this is not a problem that's very solved. So like I said earlier, I actually have to inject style sheets into the DOM in order to get this thing to work. And while I try very hard not to step on anyone else's toes, there's certain things that are just a little bit hard to figure out how to do on other pages. But yeah, it's something I'm very open to, and I think there are people who are playing with it. What is it like? Let's see if I can find it. 98.js.org. There's a guy who's done a really amazing JavaScript clone of MS Paint, and he has this entire Windows 98 clone going on at 98.js.org.
Cool.
He's included Winamp there. And there's some other, I think, projects that are, similarly trying to pull it in. And yeah, I would love to get it to work. And it should. And we do have some kind of public API where you can load it pre-populated. But I think there's a little bit of a question as to okay, well, if it's its own UI, how should you be able to control it from another UI? And I think at this point, I'm looking for people who have use cases that they can show to me and say this is how I want to use it. And then would really like to add those APIs as necessary, because all the logic's there. It's just a matter of exposing it in a way that doesn't expose, internals that I want to be able to change in the future.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm happy to report that in terms of CSS clashes or anything like that, it worked surprisingly well. There was a little bit of a z-index issue where some of our avatars are on top of it, and I could just change the in the console. I just changed the z-index to a really high value on Winamp, and that fixed that. It's the positioning. That was problematic, and I'm sure I could probably override some CSS to fix that as well. And then really just the ability to just like pass it a track and say play, as opposed to like right now the only way you can do that is
Right.
on initialization. Would probably be enough for us. But yeah, our use case is, I don't even know if we'd ever even ship it. I would have a hard requirement of lazy loading it when somebody invokes it from our on-site player, because I wouldn't want to ship that with every page load, because like 0.1% of our users would ever click on it. So we'd love to get it working, and probably will continue to hack on it in upcoming Monday afternoon sessions.
It's a thing I've been thinking about for sure, and it actually has influenced somewhat the architectural choices that I've made. So I actually do, there's like a Winamp class internally, which then I consume on the page itself. So for example, the Dropbox integration is not actually part of the core library, but that's an API that I exposed to myself such that I could inject it on the webamp.org page.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Anything else aside from, me bugging you to add APIs that you have planned? Like, this is where I'm taking it. Are there aspects of Winamp 2.9 that it doesn't do? Are there grand plans for the future, or do you feel like it's
I'm definitely approaching the limit of getting everything of these main 3 windows working. And so that's, on one hand, that's exciting, but on the other hand, right, it raises this issue of like, okay, what's next? There are people working, or there's at least somebody working on an Electron app, which would be one interesting place to take it. I'm a little bit skeptical that something that's like, wow, that's so cool in the browser, as soon as it's an Electron app, the response is gonna be like, oh God, Electron, JavaScript, everything is slow. Like, I remember Winamp was fast. Right. This is not fast. And that there's going to be this sort of like an uncanny valley. I don't know if you know like that notion in 3D rendering, that like as things get more and more real, eventually they reach a point where they're like so real, but not quite real enough that they become very disconcerting. And I worry a little bit that if this does actually get packaged up as a desktop application, that something which felt like a very detailed and accurate reimplementation in the browser is going to feel like jarringly not quite right on the desktop. So that's one thing that I'm thinking about. The other one, of course, is that Spotify thing, although I don't think that can ever quite be right due to the DRM limitations. But the thing I'm actually more interested in is there's this one of the, I think, other iconic things about Winamp was the visualizations. There were these very ornate visualizers. I think the most notable one is called Milk Drop, which would do these, psychedelic visualizations of your music in real time. You'd sort of see the screen undulating in beat with your music. And all that stuff should be possible in JavaScript. And in fact, it is. So there's a guy here in the Bay Area who's done a project called butterchurnviz.com. And it's basically a JavaScript reimplementation of Milk Drop, which was one of these visualizers. And we've gone back and forth a few times. I think he's interested in trying to integrate it, but he's been busy, and his project is not open source, so I can't just jump on it. And then there are the other main visualizer, which I think was built in to Winamp, was called AVS. I don't know what it stands for. But that actually did get open sourced as Nullsoft sort of got acquired or whatever. So the C or C++ source code is out there, and there are some people working on a JavaScript port of that, and there's also someone working on a WebAssembly transpilation of that.
I was just going to say that might be a good use of WebAssembly.
And there's so there's some talk of trying to get that to work, and I would really love to see that, because the AVS worked with these presets, which were these like declarative files that people, these like, I guess in the same way that skin authors would be distributing these skins they had made, these preset authors would be distributing these visualizations. And similarly, there's like no place to go experience those anymore. And so it would be really cool to offer, a home for those things that could be, revitalized on the web. So those are the things I'm thinking about. But I would love to see if, anyone else has any other ideas. places that we could take this or other things like that.
What a journey. I mean, just one side project away. And then next thing you know, down the rabbit hole, all this fun, Facebook, archiving the web, going back into history, hitting up old forums, resurrecting skins, tweeting them even, and loading them via URL. It's an interesting path. And then also, like you said, the vice versa on the learning process of like, taking what you've learned here and applying it to stuff you do at work is it's crazy. It's just crazy. I'm impressed very much.
It's been pretty amazing. I think how much it's unlocked contact with different people. I think that really has been the one thing that, I'm a self-taught engineer, and I spent a lot of time doing contract work outside of what I felt was sort of like the developer community. And in fact, it's funny to mention this. I remember listening to this very podcast, before I really had any friends in the industry, and being like, oh, this is what like real engineers are talking about.
Wait, so you're talking about this podcast?
The Changelog podcast.
What?
Yeah,
all right.
Serious. And
tell me more. I'm listening.
and just.
It's not this episode, I hope.
It's not a time travel story.
I wish it was. Not that your story's not good. Please continue.
And feeling very isolated and not knowing, whether I was an engineer or not, or whether, these like PHP WordPress websites I was slinging were, garbage, or whether I was actually, learning anything. And going on this journey of having done something and then getting, feedback from people on GitHub and then getting to meet, actual other engineers who have thought about these things and connecting up with people. I think it really is like the human network has been like the long-term benefit of this project. Like the people I've been able to meet, the people I've been able to learn from. Cause that's stuff that you can't there's certain things you can't self-teach without, learning from other people. And so I think that's been
no amount of money can buy that.
Totally. Yes, exactly. And so having this like community and getting to build this community of all these people who have, related interests has been really pretty incredible.
That's awesome. I'm glad it's come full circle here, and you've been able to, one, be a listener. Bummer on being isolated, but thank you for letting us be a resource for you to not feel so isolated. And 3, just kind of continuing that journey, and then ultimately coming on the show and sharing this cool story. I mean, I'm kind of touched, man. That's awesome.
Yeah. When you guys reached out on Twitter, I definitely was like, play it cool. But yeah, I think, finding your community is really important. And for me, a big part of that was, learning podcasts and other things like that, blogs and whatnot. And then, as you do more things and get more things out there, being able to connect up with real people and not being afraid to reach out and say like, hey, what's up? Let's talk.
Yeah. Hey, what's up? Come talk. I like that. Well, Jordan, thank you so much. I mean, this ending here is super special to me because I didn't know that you were a listener, and what we just shared there, that's really cool. And I'm so glad that Jared and I get the honor to host this show and then have listeners like you and others listening to this show and being changed, being transformed, being, welcomed, invited by it, because that's what we try to do ourselves. And that means a lot to me to hear that. So thank you for sharing your story. Anything else you want to share before we call the show done?
I think I'm just very, like I said, it's very, very cool to be on here. And thanks for all the work that you guys do.
Cool. Well, thank you. We'll call this show done. Thanks for listening, everybody. That's it for this episode of the Changelog. If you enjoy going back in the past to learn about Winamp and WebAmp and HTML5 and JavaScript and all this fun stuff to make something nostalgic come to life through open source, this fun project for Jordan is just this fun to go back into and dive into. It's a lot of fun doing this. If you enjoyed this, share it with a friend, rate us on Apple Podcasts, go on Overcast and favorite it. Whatever you use, like it, favorite it, share it, tweet it, whatever. Do us that favor. And also thanks to our sponsors, Rollbar, Linode, and GoCD. And of course, bandwidth for Changelog is provided by Fastly, so learn more at fastly.com. And we move fast and fix things here at Changelog because of Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com. And changelog.com is hosted on Linode servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. Check them out. Support this show. This show is hosted by myself, Adam Stacoviak, and Jared Santo. Editing for this episode is by Tim Smith. Music is by Breakmaster Cylinder. And you can find more shows just like this at changelog.com or on Overcast or on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. That's it. It's over. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Winamp. It really whips the llama's ass.